Hi, Krishna, and welcome to ISKCON of Silicon Valley's Wednesday night lecture. It's a real pleasure to have you all come and join us again. And I was thinking a lot about this when I was preparing for this lecture, and I was thinking how growing up, I used to love to read. And I used to think that heaven must be a library because there's no greater joy than a book. And now, as I've become Krishna conscious and I go into Srila Prabhupada's writings and I get a chance to taste the nectar that he has so generously poured for us into the medium of paper and print, I start to think that, it still holds true. There's no greater joy than a book. So today, we will go into the very special book, the BBT publication, Srila Prabhupada's very own Bhagavad Gita as it is. And in that, we will be doing a chapter. Before we start anything, especially spiritual, one is to express gratitude. And that gratitude would first be towards my Shiksha Guru, His Grace Srivas Pandit Prabhu, from whom I have learned this knowledge. And without whose guidance and support, I will not be here today. His blessings are my true strength, and they are my only qualification. My deepest gratitude to my Diksha Guru, His Grace Vaisheshika Dasadhikari, who is my, the wind beneath my wings, my reason to be here. His instructions are my life and soul, and they are my only salvation. My eternal gratitude to His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founding Acharya for the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. He is the one who gave me the path, the map, and the guide for my journey back home. Another thing we always do when we start any auspicious work is to seek blessings. And here we seek the blessings of our Guru Parampara, which means the enlightened lineage from which we come, those who went before us in the path. And these are, starting with the founding Acharya, they go back up all the way to Krishna. So we take the blessings of our Guru Parampara and the Vaishnavas by a set of prayers called the Mangalacharan prayers. We will say those prayers, and after that, we will sing the Jai Radha Madhav. It's a small little tune, and then we will move to the topic. So let's get started with the prayers. Om Jnanatimmirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmeditam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Padijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhaktarupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Chayatam Surato Pango Mama Manda Matirpati Matsarvasya Padam Bhujau Radha Madana Mohano. Divya Vrindaranya Kalpadrumadha Srimad Ratnangada Simhasanastau Srimad Radha Srila Govinda Devo Prishtyalibhi Sevyamano Smarami Shriman Rasa Rasarambi Vamsi Vata Tatastita Karshan Venu Swaner Gopir Gopinata Shri Stunaha Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Govinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we always sing this particular song. It's called Jai Radha Madhav from the Gitavali. And Srila Prabhupada is very fond of this song. So he sang it just before his lectures. Srila Prabhupada said that the song is a picture of Vrindavan and everything is there in it. There's Srimati Radharani, there's Vrindavan, there's the Govardhan, there's Yashoda, and all the cowherd boys. So you can imagine that for Srila Prabhupada, this song must have created a beautiful image in his mind. And it must have been very attractive in his heart, and that's why he sang it regularly. Krishna is the lover of Radha. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is the lover of the cowherd maidens of Vraja, the holder of the great hill named Govardhan, the beloved son of Mother Yashoda, the delighter of the inhabitants of Vraja, and he wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Yamuna. Most of our bhajans and kirtans are accompanied by the mridanga, the harmonium, and if nothing, then basic kartal, which is basically brass cymbals that we clang in rhythm to the music. Unfortunately, we do not carry the music adaptation for the audio here. So what happens is when we play the cymbals, we tend to lose voice for a while. So I am avoiding that, even though it's very auspicious and it's really important to add. I'm avoiding it for the sake of not losing voice at the end of the song. We lose a few minutes of lecture because of it, so I shall avoid. Please forgive me for the offense. Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Bihari Jayo Gopi Jana Vallabha Jayo Girivaradhari Jayo Girivaradhari Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Bihari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravana Chari Yamuna Tiravana Jayo Radha Madhava Jayo Kunja Vihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. So as I introduced to you before, that special book that we will be touching, and that's what we usually do on Wednesdays, we try to stick to the tried, tested, the simple. And it's usually the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is as simple as it gets, and it is also as mysterious as it gets. Srila Prabhupada says, the Bhagavad Gita is a great mystery. And I realize it for years and years, reading the Bhagavad Gita. Every time I sit down and open it, I read, and I feel like, I got it. This time I got it. And it's like the fish you're catching in the water. It slips from your hand. Just when you think you've got it, Gita slips away. But that's the whole fun of it. You'll be back to read it again, right? So before we start, let me just introduce this Bhagavad Gita to anybody who's joining us first time or who's new to this book. So the Bhagavad Gita. Gita means song. Bhagavat is Lord. This is the song of the Lord. It's a collection of verses that are basically, it's question and answer, but through the question and answers, it's a flow of instructions that Arjuna, a great warrior, is receiving from his friend Krishna, who is there to help him. He's driving the chariot for him and assisting him in his battle. And this is happening at the cusp of great battle, which was happening at the holy land of Kurukshetra. in India, and this happened around 5,000 years ago. Why is this set of songs so important when there are so many things that have happened over the years? Isn't this just a part of history? Why are we giving it so much value? The verses in this book, they were given by Krishna for the benefit of humanity at large. They were given so that one and all who receive may reach and attain the right guidance that will not only enrich and refocus their lives, but also bring for them solace, hope, peace, and everlasting joy. Now you can say, how can one man hope to give me all this? Well, that one so-called man was Krishna. And Krishna is the divine supreme personality of Godhead. And when he gives an instruction, it works. So let's see. Some of the questions we ask when we pick up this book. So I have a copy of the book that looks a little different. The one that I put on the screen is the older version. You will see these when you go to pick them up from the bookstore, or when you come to the temple to pick them up at the yoga centers, you'll see this one. And some of the questions people ask, and even I've asked when I pick up the book, is what is the purpose of Bhagavad Gita? So one of the reasons Bhagavad Gita was given is because, I would like to consider it kind of like a manual. Bhagavad Gita is like a manual for life. Just like when you buy a fridge or a washing machine, we get the manual. And without it, it's very difficult for us to find out exactly which piece is what and where things go and how it should be used. And the Bhagavad Gita is a manual for our life. Now, who's qualified to read it? Anyone. You only need a few basic qualities to be able to absorb it. But nobody stopped from reading it. Everybody's qualified to read it. But Srila Prabhupada, the writer, our founding Acharya, writes in the introduction that this is a treatise that was written mainly for the devotee. It was to help the devotee find his way back home. So, who can understand it? Like I said, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the simplest things in the world, and yet it can end up being very complicated. Most important thing, Srila Prabhupada says with reading the Bhagavad Gita is an open mind. We cannot absorb anything that we're not open to. Srila Prabhupada says, set aside all your opinions, set them aside. And with a humble, willing mind, just give it a shot. Give it one chance and see if it helps. We try so many things in this world to find some peace, some solace, some happiness. Why not this? So my request to everybody who's never read the Bhagavad Gita before and who's never been exposed to our way of life or these spiritual books, give it a shot. You never know. That's how I came, and I stayed because I loved it. And maybe you will too. The Bhagavad Gita in itself, in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita in itself, Srila Prabhupada touches a lot of beautiful topics. I'm a big fan of Srila Prabhupada's writing, especially his introduction. His introduction, as my Maharaj, Vaisheshika Maharaj would say, it needs to be focused on. So don't skip that when you're reading the book. Prabhupada introduces lots of basic concepts in that introduction. And for us, Prabhupada makes it so much simpler. He brings down 8th grade math to a 3rd grade level. And that's what we need. We need it simplified and easy to understand. So in the introduction, Prabhupada talks about a lot of things. He talks about the concept of Vedic knowledge. So this book, the shlokas in the book, are all part of our Vedic knowledge. They come all together. We have the Upanishads, we have the Mahabharata stories, the Puranas, the Upanishads, and in all of those, we have Vedic scriptures that are passed down from generation to generation. Srila Prabhupada explains that all Vedic knowledge originally comes from the Supreme, comes from the Lord. And because it comes from the Lord, it is extremely reliable and it is perfect in itself. How do we receive the Vedic knowledge? He talks about disciplic succession. Vedic knowledge is like a packet that is passed down. Instead of father to son, it is passed down from guru to shishya, or from master to disciple. And our job as a disciple of a master who has received it in that succession is to pass it on, adding to it our realizations, but no personal opinions. So as long as we maintain the purity of that transfer, the Vedic knowledge stays pure and it's able to help everybody it reaches. So as you noticed, One, we have Vedic knowledge. Another is a disciplic succession. And to have a disciplic succession, there is a need for a bona fide guru. You need a master to choose and become a disciple. And then from that master transfers the knowledge. So then question comes, why do you need a guru? I'm just going to read this Bhagavad Gita and understand it myself. I don't think I need anyone else to explain this to me or translate to me. I have a very good understanding of the English language and I am very good at comprehension. I can understand this. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. But there's a little bit of grace involved. Having a guru helps us understand the deeper meanings and the essence of the shlokas and the writing inside. It's also because since he is in disciplic succession, he's an authorized agent for the Lord in a certain way. When he helps us, we know it's coming from the right source and it'll be the right kind of help. I like to say that your guru is your GPS. You take a car and you're driving down, and most probably you'll get to where you're going. But many times you need a little bit of help. And that's how the GPS became so important. And for us on the spiritual track, it's the difference between just taking a car, having a sense of direction and driving on, and having a GPS. So a guru helps connect the Vedic knowledge and connect the Vedic knowledge to you in a bona fide and understandable way. After explaining all this, Srila Prabhupada finishes up in the introduction by giving 7 beautiful verses. I was searching, it traces back to the Padma Purana. They are spoken by Lord Shiva, glorifying the Gita to Mother Parvati. And the Gita Mahatmya is what it is called. 7 verses that speak of the beauty and the significance of the Bhagavad Gita. Towards the end, Srila Prabhupada also lists the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya. This is the lineage with which we are connected. It is the flow of Vedic knowledge from Krishna all the way down to us at this point. And he traces down the lineage. It's beautiful, and I do recommend to check the introduction before you move on. From the introduction, we get 5 main subject matters that are then covered in the Bhagavad Gita. One is Ishwar, the Supreme. The other is a Jiva, good old me. The third is Prakriti, material nature. The fourth is Kala, or time. In this sense, time would be all manifested time. It is from the beginning to the end of creation, or a time in which material nature manifests itself. That's how Prabhupada defines it. And karma is action and result. So these 5 things interact with each other. And it is the interaction of these 5 subject matters that become a comprehensive collection of instructions in the book. So who is the Supreme? Who am I, the little Jiva? What is material nature that is all around me? What is the impact of time on my life? And what should I do and not do? And how does that affect me? Understanding all this puts us in a better perspective of knowing who we are, where we are, and what should we be doing. After that, we get to the first chapter. So how come I am not stopping at all this and we're doing it in detail? It's because this is a continuing series. And today we're doing chapter 3. So I'm covering the basics for those who've missed it so that they don't just get thrown into chapter 3. I'm taking the time to cover all of them, but there are other recordings that cover them in detail. In the first chapter, we open the book, and there it is. There's Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya. You remember there was this big battle, and Sanjaya has this amazing ability to be able to see or envision the scene of the battle from where he's sitting in the palace. Dhritarashtra is, of the 2 warring parties, there's the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and Dhritarashtra is the Kauravas' father, and he's there, he's blind, and he cannot see. But Sanjaya, who is there with him, is sharing what he sees in the field of battle. And there, the scene moves into Duryodhana's camp. And Duryodhana is his eldest son. He is his heir to the throne, so to speak. He's the one who's refusing the Pandavas their rights. And then between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, there's this battle. So it's a battle between cousins. And they're arguing over who has the right to rule. And even though the Pandavas were 5, Pancha-Pandavas 5, they request to give a certain amount of share, just a little bit, so that they can also rule, and not to completely, refuse. Duryodhana does not want to oblige. And now we end up at this impasse where there is a huge battle and everybody has chosen a side. In that scene, Duryodhana talks about his strengths, his military strengths, the strengths of the opposing army, and then they blow the conches. In the olden times, the blowing of conches was also used to represent, it brings auspiciousness and also heralds the onset of the war itself. So they blow the conches, and then enter our two heroes, Arjuna and Krishna. And Arjuna, who enters, he's a very famous, extremely capable fighter. He says, Krishna, take me forward. I want to see who is in the opposing side. Who wants to join with Duryodhana and fight with me like this? And Krishna obliges. He very sweetly takes him down and says, take a look. There they are. All the people you have come to fight. And that's where the problem starts, because Arjuna sees among the people out there his own family members. He sees his teachers, he sees his uncles, he sees his cousins. And suddenly he gets very confused. He starts explaining to Krishna how this doesn't seem right, doesn't feel good. These are my own family. I cannot kill them. That would mean, after killing them, how can I be happy? It would be blood on my hands. This is not, I don't think this is the right thing to do. Better that they kill me than me kill them, because in so many ways it's wrong. He's justifying his inaction. Nimittani viparitani. I see so many calamities by this action of mine. And he says, if I kill them, I'll be killing my own people. If I kill the heads of the family, then the family will collapse. It will lose family tradition. There will be unwanted progeny because the women are unprotected. There will be irreligion spread over, and all the good activities that family, that dynasty was doing will be lost. And then these are my own people. I have to be compassionate towards them. Is it really worth it? Give me one good reason why, Krishna. And that's the mood he's in. And then finally he says, I won't fight. I won't fight. And we get to chapter 2. In chapter 2, it's Krishna's turn, and he's asking him, Arjuna, what happened? He says, how did these impurities come upon you, dear Arjuna? They don't befit you at all. They're not something I expect from you. You're a warrior. How can you speak like this? And Arjuna is still very upset, so you can understand, and there's this beautiful expression of how he's sweating, his Gandivam, his bow slips from his hands, and he's trembling, and it's just a beautiful expression of deep grief. He's unable to move forward and execute the plan. And he says, I don't see any good coming out of this. I am so confused. And at the point, he says, I surrender. Please instruct me. A very important point that in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada stresses the ability to surrender and accept instruction. He says, please instruct me. And in that point, he says, Krishna, I'm drowning in my grief. Krishna, I won't fight. So Krishna gives him a sweet smile and says, what are you grieving for? And he starts to explain the qualities of the soul. He says, you are grieving for something that does not deserve such grief. If you think, as he explains everything to him, he says, if you're concerned that you're killing them, you need to remember that you are not just this body, you are the soul. And he explains the soul. He says the soul is eternal. It never dies when the body dies. So even though the bodies are dying, you are not really killing anyone, because the soul never dies. If you think that, okay, the soul dies and then it's reborn and dies and it's reborn again and again, even then, why are you lamenting? Because what you kill will be reborn. It's not like the death is permanent. It is going to get a rebirth. So in either case, there's nothing to lament. And he says, you are a Kshatriya. Such opportunities for authentic battle, like a battle for the right purposes, should never be given up, because a Kshatriya, for him, it's no loss. He's a fighter by his nature. If he wins such a battle, he will get fame and riches. If he loses such battles, then the doors to heaven open up for somebody who is righteous in the battlefield. So you will win either way. So just fight. Don't fight considering the dualities. Fight because that is your duty. Then, this is a long chapter. So towards the end, Krishna starts to talk about Nishkama Karma, working without results. And from text 54 onwards, he starts describing all these different ways in which you can, in a way, clear your head, become realized. And he's talking about a lot of different methods. And from text 54, he starts talking. So text 54 starts with Arjuna asking, what are the qualities of a realized soul? He says, oh Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is merged in transcendence? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? How does he walk? And this triggers a full flow of descriptions that Krishna starts giving. And in that, you can notice his description goes in a certain way. He says, he will give up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction. And when his mind thus purified finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is in pure transcendental consciousness. One who is not disturbed in mind, even amid the threefold miseries. He is free from attachment, fear, and anger. He is a sage of steady mind, and in this way he keeps describing one who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, like the tortoise withdraws its limbs. He is perfectly fixed in consciousness. So he says, you restrict from sense enjoyment, and the taste for sense enjoyment still remains. But seizing such engagements by experiencing higher taste is the way he can be fixed in consciousness. So he's explaining different ways of fixing your consciousness. He's not explaining it in a standard procedure or format, but he's explaining different processes. He's talking about, Ashtanga yoga. He's talking about Buddhi yoga. He's touching on everything. And in the end, Arjuna gets confused. So as we wrap down chapter 2, where Krishna is explaining all these different processes and ways by which a person can get to the regulative principles of freedom and obtain the mercy of the Lord, he says, Krishna, you are confusing me. And that's where we land at chapter 3. Before we start chapter 3, I wanted to read this purport, which comes in the first shloka of chapter 3. And this very nicely explains what we'll be covering in chapter 3 also. Srila Prabhupada says, sometimes Krishna consciousness is misunderstood to be inertia. Because the descriptions that were going on in chapter 2 are all saying, like, take your senses away, don't interact, just disconnect and, renounce. And if you focus, and then you will achieve. But that may not really be the case. Sometimes Krishna consciousness is misunderstood to be inertia. And one with such a misunderstanding often withdraws to a secluded place to become fully Krishna conscious by chanting the holy name of Lord Krishna. But without being trained in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, it is not advisable to chant the holy name of Krishna in a secluded place where one may acquire only cheap adoration from the innocent public. So he says, sitting alone in a corner, avoiding everything, keeping yourself away it is not the best way. So let's look at the text. Arjuna says, text 1, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want me to engage in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruitive work? My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively, which will be most beneficial for me? He's saying, first you say this, then you say that. First you're telling me to fight, then you say intelligence is better. Then why do you want me to fight? If intelligence is better, then I will stay away and I will use my intelligence to understand everything. I don't need to physically have any fruitive work involved. And he says, Krishna, you're confusing me. Your equivocal instructions, which means confusing instructions, aren't helping. Please decisively tell me which will be beneficial. And there we are at text 2. I marked out the purports of things that I wanted to read because there are certain places where nobody can explain it like Srila Prabhupada. So let's hear what Prabhupada has to say. He says, in the previous chapter, as a prelude to the Bhagavad Gita, many different paths were explained. Remember, I was reading through those descriptions, such as Sankhya Yoga, Buddhi Yoga, control of the senses by your intelligence, work without fruitive desire, and the position of a neophyte. This was all presented unsystematically. A more organized outline of the path will be necessary for action and understanding. Arjuna therefore wants to clear up these apparently confusing matters so that any common man can accept them without misinterpretation. So the whole idea is to get clarity on this. And that's where we're headed in this chapter. The Supreme Personality of Godhead says, O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Self-realization has two approaches. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation. They like to analyze, think, permutate, combinate, and then kind of find the answer to this. The others are in action. The others do it by devotional service. He says, not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. Very important. This is a very nice statement that, in a nutshell, explains the issue here. He says, just because you avoid work doesn't mean you will not have any reaction from it. And just by renunciating or taking renunciation, avoiding contact with the sense objects, can you attain perfection? It's not a straight path here. Even though it looks like I can just avoid this and stop doing this, and together I will attain perfection, it isn't that easy, he says. Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. The modes are very strong. Remember the three modes? The three modes are always acting on everyone. And we should never underestimate the power of the modes. In text 5 purport, Srila Prabhupada explains it nicely. He says, it is not a question of embodied life, but it is the nature of the soul itself, that it will always be active. Without the presence of the spirit soul, the material body cannot move. The body is only a dead vehicle to be worked by the spirit soul, which is always active and cannot stop even for a moment. So then how do we plan to stay quiet without doing anything, right? As such, the spirit soul has to be engaged in the good work of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, it will be engaged in occupations dictated by the illusory energy. In contact with the material energy, the spirit soul acquires material modes. And to purify the soul from such affinities, it is necessary to engage in the prescribed duties enjoined in the Shastras. So, because the spirit soul is in contact with the modes, we end up doing things that connect us more and more to the material world. To be able to purify our senses and to be able to attain spiritual progress, we need to work in Krishna consciousness, which means we need to be able to do our service, keeping Krishna in the center. Do it in devotional service. So if we choose not to do anything, we will be helplessly forced to do something, because this nature of the soul is to be active and not inactive. Sankhya Yoga, or the analytical study of the nature of spirit and matter, is the subject matter for persons who are inclined to speculate and understand things by experimental knowledge and philosophy. The other class of men work in Krishna consciousness. This Buddhi Yoga is to depend entirely on the Supreme, or more specifically in our case, Krishna. And in this way, all the senses can be brought under control very easily. He says, depend on Krishna. By yourself, it is very difficult. But those who depend on Krishna and follow their working in Krishna consciousness, for them, their senses come under control very easily. He's not saying let go, never interact. He says, bring them under control. Therefore, both the yogas, which two yogas? Sankhya Yoga, speculation, and the Buddhi Yoga, acting in Krishna consciousness. Both these yogas are interdependent, just like religion and philosophy. Religion without philosophy is sentiment, or sometimes fanaticism, while philosophy without religion is mental speculation. The ultimate goal is Krishna, because the philosophers who are also sincerely searching for the absolute truth come in the end to Krishna consciousness. This is a very beautiful purport, because as we move along, as we discuss Nishkam, Karma and everything, this is the whole concept. You can't just speculate. You can't just act not knowing what you're doing. So you need both. You need to understand and act in understanding. And in that combination, you will attain your goal. Text 6. One who restrains the senses of action, which means I don't interact with anything around me, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So this is it. I will never eat ice cream again. I'm never going to eat ice cream. No ice cream. But I can imagine the flavors. And I can imagine the taste of the ice cream. So what am I doing? I'm saying I'm not interacting. It's a very simple example, but it kind of explains that text very nicely. It says, you can restrain yourself from the action, but if your mind is dwelling on it, then how is that in action? He says, you're just pretending. Any chance you get, you're going to go back and do it. So then how have you improved? On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control, and in the previous one, we see the explanation, we take the support of the Lord. We let the Lord help us. He tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment. He is by far superior. This is text 7 in a long chapter. But see, this text in itself explains the chapter. He says, you try to control your senses by applying your karma yoga, application of your work in the service of the Lord, in Krishna consciousness, without being attached to whatever comes. And such a man, even though he may not be able to fully control his senses, because he's only trying, he's not perfectly controlling it, he's far superior to somebody who can control his senses, but can't take his mind off the sense objects. Text 8. Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, there are people, just a second. The Lord desires that Arjuna performs his prescribed duties as set forth for Kshatriyas. Arjuna was a householder and a military general. Therefore, it is better for him to remain in that job, in his prescribed duty as set forth for Kshatriyas. Such activities will cleanse the heart of the mundane man and free him from material contamination. So-called renunciation for the purpose of maintenance is never approved by the Lord, nor by religious scripture. After all, one has to maintain the body and soul together by some work. Work should not be given up capriciously without purification of materialistic propensities. If our desires are not purified, giving up the work will not solve the problem. And everybody needs to work. But the thing is to work without attachment in the service of the Lord. So he's saying you cannot stop action. The soul always needs to be moving. It needs to be always in a state of in an active state. Your 3 modes are always working on you. It's very difficult to overcome. Take shelter of the Lord. Take his support. Start your work as a karma yogi. Work in Krishna consciousness, not being attached to the results, and you will soon attain the purification you need to improve in your spiritual life and attain self-realization. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage. So in this work without attachment, if you're trying to say, it doesn't mean you're not attached to anything. It means you are giving the results to Vishnu. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, if the work is being done only for me, I love apple tarts. I really want to eat some. Let me make apple tarts today. Oh, they came out really well. Let me offer 1 or 2 to Krishna, and then I'm going to eat the rest. So, how pure is the intention at that point? I'm giving you simple examples because it works well. Yes, everything we do, we offer. All the food we have, we offer. But the intention is to feed Krishna. The first act should have been apple tarts. Let me feed Krishna apple tarts today. And then we start working on the recipe. Do you see how the intention twists? I have desires. It's not like I don't have desires. But I am dovetailing my desires towards the service of the Lord. And I am not attached to the end result. If somebody comes and asks me for those tarts, I'm more than happy to give it to them because it's Krishna's will where they go, end of the day. But you have to find a way to control your senses and apply it in Krishna's service. You don't have to give up enjoying those tarts. That's not what Krishna is asking. But he's saying, understand the process, because by following that process, you can come back to me. Your desires will purify and you can come back to me. Otherwise, if you just make them and eat them yourself, you're verily eating sin. You're basically just getting yourself more and more entangled in the material world, and you will tie yourself here with bondage. Let's see the steps that Krishna explains. Text 10 to 16, it's called the cycle of sacrifice, because at the end, in text 16, he calls this the cycle of sacrifice. So when I used to read this, it used to be a little disconnected for me. I really like Gaurang Prabhu's explanation of this. Beautifully, he connects everything up. I really liked that. It helped a lot. The cycle of sacrifice, what is that? Text 10. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna of sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation." The Lord sent forth men, demigods, and sacrifices. Everything came from the Lord. Lord sent forth men. He also sent out the demigods, and he sent these items for sacrifice. The demigods, being pleased by the sacrifices, will also please you. So demigods are supplying you all these things for your yajna. You perform the yajna, and then you offer to the demigod. Demigod, being satisfied, will again give you more. And in this way, there is a cooperation between men and demigods, and prosperity will reign for all. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is first offered for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment rarely eat only sin. So remember, I was discussing that just now, that intention should be to offer it. The Prajapati is Lord Vishnu. He is the Lord of all living creatures, all worlds, and all beauties, and the protector of everyone. The Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform yajna or sacrifice for the satisfaction of Vishnu, so that while in the material world, they can live very comfortably without anxiety. And after finishing the present material body, they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is the whole program for the conditioned soul. That was our program, the agenda. By the performance of yajna, the conditioned souls gradually became Krishna conscious and became godly in all respects. In the age of Kali, the Sankirtan yajna, the chanting of the names of gods, is recommended. This is the recommended process of yajna in the age of Kali because of various reasons. The other yajnas are not that effective, so we take to the Sankirtan yajna. One should know, however, that all necessities of life that the human society requires are supplied by the demigod agents of the Lord. No one can manufacture anything. I really like that, where Prabhupada is explaining the purport of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, shloka 12. He says, no one can make anything. All these eatables of human society, grains, fruits, vegetables, milk, sugar, for persons in the mode of goodness, we use this. And also eatables for the non-vegetarians, like meat. None of this can be manufactured by men. Again, take for example the other necessities. Heat, light, water, air. None of them can be manufactured. If we forget the purpose of human life and simply take these supplies that have been provided from the agents of the Lord for sense gratification and become more and more entangled in material existence, which is not the purpose of creation, certainly we become thieves and therefore we are punished by the law of material nature. So he says, you can take, it is given to you to take, but you must take and then offer your yajna in gratitude. Only then the cycle will continue. If you just take for your own personal sense gratification, then that is not the right way. You are actually stealing, because you were not given all these things for you to just enjoy for yourself. It was given for you to perform yajna. Now, again and again, this word yajna turns up, this sacrifice. What is Prabhupada talking about? What is this sacrifice? What should I do? Let's see what this yajna is. Text 14 says, all living bodies subsist on food grains. These food grains are produced from rain. Parjanyat annam sambhava. Rains are produced by the performance of yajna or sacrifice. Yajna is born of prescribed duties. Do you see the flow? We need grains to survive. The grains grow only when there is rain. The rains come only when you do sacrifice, because this is the necessity for life and it's being given by the demigod. And this sacrifice, where is that coming from? It is born of prescribed duties. So till now we heard the word yajna, sacrifice. Now comes in a new word, prescribed duties. This phrase pops up. So till now I was trying to understand what is sacrifice. It says sacrifice happens when you do your duty. Okay, what is prescribed duty? It says regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, their all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. Basically means The Lord is in all these acts. My dear Arjuna, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice, thus established by the Vedas, certainly leads a life full of sin. Living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when we start reading it, in the first canto, first chapter, we talk about what is the purpose of human life. Atato Brahma Jignasa, right? We are sent here to ask why. What is the purpose of my life? And he says, your purpose is not to just enjoy everything that's available for your sense gratification. No, that was not the idea. God sent, remember the first shloka, God sent the demigods, men, and the items for sacrifice so that the men would perform their prescribed duties using these items of sacrifice, and thereby, by performing their prescribed duties, yajna or sacrifice happens, and they offer the sacrifice to the demigods, and that pleases the demigods to release more supplies, more essentials of life. And actually, offering it to the demigods is just a subtle, indirect way of actually offering it to the Supreme. So there was a discussion that I was listening to online, where Prabhu was explaining, Warang Prabhu was explaining how, that people offer it to the demigods, but we are devotees. We offer it straight to Krishna. We offer it straight to the Supreme. So we don't need to go through, it's not like we're avoiding the demigods or that they will be unhappy with us because we didn't offer it to them. Since we're offering it directly to the Supreme, it's perfectly fine the way we do the sacrifice. And he says, what are regulated activities? Regulated activities are those activities that are prescribed in the Vedas. Since the Vedas, remember transcendental knowledge, we talked about how it comes directly from the Lord. So since the Vedas all come from the Lord, we can trust and follow it. God's instructions exist in those God's will exists in those instructions. And by following those regulated activities, we are doing what he has instructed to do. We are performing yajna. He says, if you do not follow it, it's a waste of a life, because this is what you were instructed to do. Then text 17 to 29 goes on to talk about who is a self-realized soul. He says, okay, you have to perform prescribed duties. You have to make this sacrifice. You have to do this yajna. And only then you will slowly purify yourself and get to a point where you go back home, back to God. In this lifetime, you purify yourself, and then you get to go back home, back to God. Prabhupada explains that in the purport I had read. He says, but for one, Krishna puts an exception. He says, but for one who takes pleasure in the self, he describes the self, he describes that person, Siddha Muni, one who is self-realized, who is not disturbed by anything around him. He says, for one who takes pleasure in the self, whose human life is one of self-realization, who is satisfied in the self alone, self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. Now, prescribed duties apply only to those who are still attached, they still have a certain amount of control feature left. They still have a little bit of longing to enjoy the material world. They're still working on it. But for those who have completely, for those who are fully self-realized, who have completely understood their purpose and have been able to apply themselves sincerely in the process, once they get to a stage of fully satiated self-realization, there's no need to do prescribed duties. A self-realized man has no purpose to fulfill in the discharge of his prescribed duties, nor has he any reason not to perform such work. So neither he has a reason to perform, nor a reason to not perform. Nor has he any need to depend on any other living being, because he is fully self-realized. Therefore, without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty, for by working without attachment, one attains the Supreme. So when we do something and we offer it back, like to the demigods indirectly or directly to the Lord, as we keep offering it back to the Lord, and by doing, we are following our prescribed duties and making acts of sacrifice, we will keep getting purified. We don't attach ourselves to the fruits of our activities. We offer it to Krishna. And in this way, by working like this without attachment, you can attain the Supreme. He gives the example of King Janaka. King Janaka attained perfection solely by performing prescribed duties. Therefore, for the sake of educating people in general, you should perform your work. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Now, we know that Arjuna is fully realized. He's not a work in progress here. The whole situation has been created by Krishna to benefit the world. It's not like Arjuna needs to work on this. So when he says to Arjuna, even though you are self-realized, I still recommend, says Krishna, I still recommend keep doing your prescribed duties. See King Janaka. King Janaka was the father of Sita. Even though he was a fully realized soul, he continued to perform his prescribed duties because whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. So text 21, let's see where the shloka is. The shloka says, Yad yad acharate shreshtas tat tad evataro jana sa yat pramanam kurute lokas tat anuvartate. Purport by His Grace. That's all, Prabhupada. People in general always require a leader who can teach the public by practical behavior. A leader cannot teach the public to stop smoking if he himself smokes. Lord Chaitanya says that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. One who teaches in that way is an acharya or an ideal teacher. Therefore, a teacher must follow the principles of Shastra to teach the common man. The teacher cannot manufacture rules against the principles of revealed scriptures. Thus, the leader's teaching should be based on the principles of such standard Shastras. The king or executive of a state, the father, school teacher are all considered natural leaders of the innocent people in general. Such natural leaders have great responsibility to their dependents, and therefore they should know and be conversant with standard books of moral and spiritual codes. So he says, qualities of a leader, Prabhupada is talking about here. He says, whatever a leader does, others are following. Innocent people follow it without questioning. So even though Janaka did not need to do all the prescribed duties, he kept doing it because common people looking at him would get confused. And instead of following his instructions, they will try to imitate his actions. And this is explained further on by Krishna. He says, so even those who don't need to do prescribed duties know better than to stop. They generally continue it because they want to maintain the discipline for everybody else. O son of Pritha, there is no work prescribed for me, this is Krishna saying, within all the three planetary systems. Nor am I in want of anything, nor have I a need to obtain anything. Yet I am engaged in prescribed duties. He says, even I am doing prescribed duties. When I come down to the earth, I follow prescribed duties. But where is the need for me? I have no need to do sacrifice. The lawmaker is beyond the law. Says Gautam Prabhu's sentence was very nice. Lawmakers beyond the law in this context. God created this whole thing for us. Now putting God into it and asking him to follow the rules doesn't make sense. He doesn't need all this. He made it for us so we could purify ourselves and go back to him. So where is his need? And he is self-satisfied. He is full of all opulences. He has no needs. Yet he engages in prescribed duties. And he explains it, he says, for if I ever fail to engage and carefully perform prescribed duties, O Partha, that's another name for Arjuna, he says, O Partha, certainly all men would follow my path, use me as an excuse. If I did not perform prescribed duties, all these worlds would be put to ruination. I would be the cause of creating unwanted population, and I would thereby destroy the peace of all living beings. Krishna says, if I'm not careful, people have a tendency to just follow and imitate what I do, and they will try to do this, not realizing that my standard is different from their standard. So better to keep doing it, even though I don't need it, because I will set a proper standard for them to follow. Varna Sankara is unwanted population which disturbs the peace of society. In order to check this social disturbance, there are prescribed rules and regulations by which population can automatically become peaceful and organized for spiritual progress in life. When Lord Krishna descends, naturally, he deals with such rules and regulations in order to maintain the prestige and necessity of such important performances. The Lord is the father of all living entities. And if living entities are misguided, indirectly, the responsibility goes to the Lord. Therefore, whenever there is general disregard of regulative principles, the Lord himself descends and corrects society. We should, however, note carefully that although we have to follow in the footsteps of the Lord, we still have to remember we cannot imitate him. The Lord can lift Govardhan hill. We cannot. So we cannot imitate his actions. We can follow his instructions and his standards. Many examples are given even of demigods. Like Shiva, he was able to swallow this whole halahala, the poison, right, from the churning. We cannot do that. So then why are we imitating him, right? So that's what Krishna is explaining. The ignorant and the innocent will not understand the difference between following and imitating. So for their sakes, it's better to maintain prescribed duty so that they see me doing this and therefore they also continue to do the same. Otherwise, it will just cause a lot of trouble. So as to not to disturb the minds of ignorant men attached to the fruitive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work. Rather, by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness. So he's explaining about this idea of working in devotion versus working for fruitive results. Those who are attached to a result, you cannot suddenly, make them stop doing that and switch them to something else. They want the result. They're attached to the end result. Do not induce them to stop. Rather, slowly guide them by working in the spirit of devotion. Engage them in all sorts of activities. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Remember that picture of the three modes where, the modes are making the man dance like a puppet? That's a beautiful example of how the three modes work on us and how we think that we are doing, but actually we are being made to do. In many times, we think this was our choice, but we are being pushed by the three modes. We are under the influence of Maya. The purport for this is text 27. Prabhupada says, two persons, one is in Krishna consciousness, and the other is in material consciousness. They work at the same level, and they appear to be working at the same platform. But there is a big gulf, a wide gulf in their respective positions. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that he is the doer of anything. I am the boss of this company. I am going to achieve these results. And in the long run, I will own all those houses and land, and I will be the proprietor of everything. The materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of his nescience. He does not know that this gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature under the order of the Supreme, and as such, his bodily mental activities should be engaged in the service of the Supreme. The ignorant man forgets the Supreme Personality of Godhead, also known as Rishikesha, or Master of the Senses. And due to his long misuse of those senses and sense gratification, he is bewildered by false ego and made to forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. So this is the purport for 27. And Prabhupada explains that when the false ego takes over and you start thinking you're the doer of everything, you disconnect. You're unable to connect to your original nature and understand what is your original position. And then you fall more and more into the clutches of material nature. One who is in knowledge of the absolute truth, O mighty armed, does not engage himself in the senses and sense gratification, knowing well the difference between work in devotion and working for fruitive results. He doesn't do it for himself, but he tries to do everything in the service of the Lord. Bewildered by the modes of material nature, the ignorant fully engage themselves in material activities and become attached. But the wise should not unsettle them, although these duties are inferior due to the performer's lack of knowledge. Why is Krishna saying not to disturb them? We should try to help, right? So that's the nature of devotees. God himself is saying, leave them. Slowly they'll figure it out. But at this point, don't rock the boat. But devotees, they're always so compassionate to the living entities. They want to give them some opportunity. So they go up and they say, take a book, or they try to tell them a little bit about Krishna. And if nothing works, try to give them prasadam. Give them some form of sukriti so they can increase their ability to absorb spiritual knowledge. Somehow help them along the path. And that's the beauty of devotees. They go way beyond what even Krishna is asking to help those. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrender all your work unto me. So he says, what is the final decision? He's saying, with full knowledge of me, surrender all that work you do. Give the result to me. Fully understanding me, without any desire for profit, no claim to proprietorship, free from lethargy, fight. Surrender, understand, no claim or desire, and full of energy, free from lethargy, energetically. Fight. Do your work. Do your prescribed duty. That is text 30. So, purport says, this verse clearly indicates the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita. Look at that. There it is, the purpose of the whole book, it says. And this will come again and again and again. The Lord instructs that one has to become fully Krishna conscious to discharge duties as if in military discipline. Such an injunction makes things a little difficult. Nevertheless, duties must be carried out with dependency on Krishna, because that is our constitutional position as a living entity. Living entity cannot be happy independent of the cooperation of the Supreme, because the internal constitutional position of the living entity is to become subordinate to the desires of the Lord. Arjuna was therefore ordered by Krishna to fight as if the Lord were his military commander. One has to sacrifice everything for the goodwill of the Supreme Lord, and at the same time discharge prescribed duties without claiming proprietorship. Arjuna did not have to consider the order of the Lord, he only had to execute it. The Supreme Lord is the soul of all souls. Therefore, one who depends solely and wholly on the Supreme, without personal consideration or in other actions, one who is fully Krishna conscious, is called Adhyatma Chetas. Nirashi means that one has to act in order of the master, but should not expect fruitive results. Example, beautiful examples. Cashier. A bank cashier may count millions of dollars for his employer, but he does not claim a cent for himself. Similarly, one has to realize nothing in the world belongs to any individual. Everything belongs to the Supreme. That is the real purport of Mai, or unto me. Offer it unto me means basically it all belongs to me. I've given you an opportunity to use it. Offer it back to me and take the full benefit of that work. Let it help cleanse you and help your spiritual progress. And that is what Prabhupada is explaining in the purport. Those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions, who follow this teaching faithfully, without envy, become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. But those who out of envy disregard these teachings and do not follow them regularly are to be considered bereft of all knowledge, befooled, and ruined in their endeavors for perfection. Envy is a major challenge. We cannot afford to envy the Lord. And we won't if we can understand our position very carefully. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature. For everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish? Unless one is situated on the transcendental platform, he cannot be freed of the influence of the modes. Prabhupada explains this again and again. We are always going to be entangled. Krishna consciousness helps one get out of this material entanglement. You may be engaged, but you will be engaged in your prescribed duties, and you will be engaged in it by giving up the end result. No one should suddenly give up his prescribed duties and become a so-called yogi artificially. It is better to be situated in one's position and try to attain Krishna consciousness under superior training, under the instruction of a guru. Thereby, one can be freed from the clutches of Krishna's Maya. There are the principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. For example, sex enjoyment is a necessity for the conditioned soul, and the sex enjoyment is allowed under the license of marriage. According to scriptural injunctions, one is forbidden to engage in such relationships with any woman other than one's wife. All other women are considered one's mother. But in spite of such injunctions, a man is still inclined to have such relationships with other women. These propensities are to be curbed. Otherwise, they will become stumbling blocks on the path of self-realization. As long as the material body is there, the necessities of the material body are allowed, but they are allowed under rules and regulations. We should not rely upon the control of such allowances. One has to follow these rules and regulations unattached to them, because practice of sense gratification under regulations may also lead one to go astray, as much as there is always a chance of an accident, even on royal roads. So he said, even by following, we have accidents, but at least we must try to follow. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. So Krishna is saying, don't try to do what you were not made to do. You are a Kshatriya, you stick to your Kshatriya Dharma, you go in and battle, don't ask questions. This is what I'm giving you, accept it. And in that process, by performing your duty, Don't get attached to the result of the duty. Let it go. Do it as a service unto me. And in that way, even if you do it faultily, it is better than trying to stop being a Kshatriya. He's refusing to fight. He says, I would just go and beg for a living. How can you do that? It is against your nature. It's not your prescribed duty. Doing that is dangerous, says Krishna. So Krishna's final say on the matter is this. Let's recap. What is the cycle of sacrifice? It is a cycle by which Krishna created demigods, men, and the essentials, and he sent them down. Demigods give you the essentials, men perform sacrifice, and they offer it back to the demigods. They, being pleased, to give you more essentials. That's one cycle. This is the cycle of sacrifice. But what is the sacrifice? The sacrifice is created when we follow and perform prescribed duties. What are prescribed duties? So when we look at prescribed duties, it says the Vedas define what our prescribed duties are. And these prescribed duties should be performed because only by performing them properly are we doing acts of sacrifice. The Lord is always there in acts of sacrifice. Who should perform prescribed duties? Even those who are fully self-realized and who don't need to perform such duties should still continue to perform them because they set an example to the common man. And Krishna explains that very nicely, how the common man is unable to understand the difference between following in their footsteps and imitating them. So best is to maintain the protocol and keep doing your prescribed duties so that they do not get confused and make mistakes. Can your prescribed duty be switched or avoided? No. You stick to your prescribed duties. Far better to do your own duties, even badly, than to do someone else's duties perfectly. Who is the doer? Are we the doer? No. Usually it's the three modes acting upon us. And when we do our work, if we can just try our best to control our interaction with the three modes and do our service with the intention of offering it to Krishna, then work done as an offering to the Lord helps us escape bondage. I hope a little bit of this chapter is now a little clearer to you. This chapter is heavy. All chapters are heavy. Second chapter was heavier than this. But I recommend just, the Gita is like a door. You keep knocking, and once in a while it'll open, and then you get this. The moments when you get a clearer understanding are worth all the effort. That's how I feel. When I find the text that I've read 3 times and the 4th time in some other position, someone else is giving a lecture somewhere else, it's a little more clarity. The 10-watt bulb becomes 20 watt, or the 20 watt becomes 50 watt. And the light is brighter and the vision is clearer. It's worth all the effort. I think there was this thing, success is 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. And I think that applies even with spiritual path when we're trying to understand stuff. Maharaj keeps saying, keep at it. And I say it on to you too. Keep at it. And those moments of enlightenment when we get that little leap is worth it all. So we're on the last leg of this. Where are we? Almost. Okay. We're on the last leg, the fag leg of this chapter. This is text 36 to 43. And this is an unusual topic. This is lust. So, conquering lust. Text 36. Arjuna says, O descendant of Vrishni. These are different ways of describing Krishna. I love the beauty in the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna and Krishna don't call themselves Arjuna and Krishna all the way through the Bhagavad Gita. There is such a beauty in the Sanskrit language where we are seeing it all in English, but it's all Sanskrit. So there's a beautiful description, there's a way of calling a person by his characteristics, by his activities, by his relationships. O descendant of Vrishni. This is a description of somebody by their relationship. And then we have Rishikesha, who is the lord of the senses, his abilities. And then we have Partha, again, relationships. So and then there's somewhere you have Keshava, killer of the Keshi demon, his action. It's beautiful. So Sanskrit in that way is very, very poetic, and I love how it creates these images of people and places and things. Very visual language. It's beautiful when you get into it. I'm sharing this with you because sometimes we read the Bhagavad Gita many times, but we read it like this. I'm done. And I want everybody who opens the Bhagavad Gita Of course, you get your full benefit by reciting the Gita, no doubt. If you can fall in love with it. And that's a completely different level altogether. And by noticing and understanding all these little nuances and flavors inside the text, it brings us closer and closer to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada's voice is in these books. Srila Prabhupada's intent is in these books. The instruction of the Lord is in these books. These books are not material. They are divine. And we can interact. We can get closer and closer by peeling the layers and noticing it more, noticing the details, the textures, the designs in which the language flows, in which the instructions are given, and the mood and the moment in which it is being presented. Okay, I digress. Sorry. Arjuna said, "O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? What forces me to do these sinful things, these wrong things, even though I know I shouldn't be doing it? I really don't want to do it, but I end up doing it. What makes me do that? Have you, there's something, you're standing outside the ice cream shop and you know you're on a diet and you shouldn't be in there, but before you know it, the ice cream's in your hand." An excuse, I know, but it's a simpler explanation. It says, "O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force?" Supreme Personality of Godhead says, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion, and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust." Let's see what Prabhupada has to say about this. This is the last part of this chapter. So let's take a look, because it's really, really personal. Lust is very personal. It's a desire. It's a desire to connect with things. It's a desire to own, to possess, to interact. It starts with contact with the material mode of passion and transforms into wrath. Let's see what's going on. When a living entity comes in contact with material creation, his eternal love for Krishna transforms into lust in association with the mode of passion. What is the mode of passion? It's about having, owning, doing. That's the kind of mode it is. In other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, just as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. It becomes something different entirely. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Let me read that again. Like Maharaj says, some things are worth reading twice. The sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity. It is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain tangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated into the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. That's a lot of words and concepts and topics, if you ask me. First, we're talking about the three modes. We're talking about a person in the mode of passion for whom lust is triggered by contact with the senses. Then it transforms into wrath when he gets to the mode of ignorance. Instead, he says, with Krishna consciousness, we should convert this mode of passion into a mode of goodness, a higher mode, and thereby overcome this and not let lust become wrath. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities are parts and parcels of this bliss. They also have partial independence, but misuse of the independence and the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment. Isn't that nice? He says, Lord was one. He created many. to increase his spiritual bliss. These living entities, all of us, are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. We all have partial independence. But when we misuse our independence, the service attitude that we're supposed to have, our original service attitude, will become transformed into a propensity for sense enjoyment. And then we come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lusty propensities. And when completely baffled by prolonged lusty activities, they begin to inquire about their real position. So basically, you cannot satisfy yourself in the material world. Kalayam ashashvatam. And by trying and trying and trying and trying, Krishna hopes that you get to a point where you start asking questions and you will inquire into your real position. This inquiry is called Atato Brahma Jigyasa. And one should inquire into the Supreme. Therefore, lust is transformed into love of the Supreme or transformed into Krishna consciousness, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Rama, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana. But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of Lord because he used it in the service of the Lord. We are not Hanuman. So again, the point of not imitating him. We have to understand that wrath is in the mode of not passion, ignorance. We don't want to go there. We want to convert lust into, we want to take it into the mode of goodness and convert it into something better and avoid letting it become wrath. So in this fire, smoke, mirror, text 38, there's this explanation. There are 3 degrees of covering by which pure consciousness of a living entity is obscured. The covering is lust, but it is in different manifestations. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living entity can be little perceived. The living entity is exhibiting his Krishna consciousness slightly. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to the cleaning process, cleaning process of the mirror of the mind by spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names. The embryo covered by a womb is the analogy of a helpless position. The baby is so helpless he cannot move. This stage can be compared to that of trees. Trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human. So from this, what I understand is that if we keep indulging our lust and continuously keep indulging our lust in huge levels, we will reach these points where we will not have control over this. Like trees, where they don't even move. They're not allowed to indulge anymore because you're not able to control yourself. You were put here to learn to control yourself, learn to convert everything into a spiritual standard. Instead, you're falling more and more into it. So Krishna puts you in a position where you don't hurt yourself, right? So he's putting you into a more and more, less and less active, more and more passive position so that you don't continue to do this. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive his Krishna consciousness. Just like a fire can be kindled with a little bit of work. Careful handling of the smoke and the fire can be, by careful handling of smoke, the fire can be made to blaze up. So this is our opportunity in human life. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied. Please understand, it is never satisfied and burns like a fire. With the material mode of passion, our desires burn. We want this, we want that, and this comes between contact. The material mode of passion comes in contact with material nature. When senses come in contact with sense objects, in that situation, then this desire, oh, I want this. It reminds me of that, eat that, drink this, taste that, do this, have that, and all this. And then when I can't, when I realize it's not being satisfied, there's so much more, I want more, I need more. And then we go into the mode of ignorance that transforms into that. Instead, if we start applying it and using it in Krishna's service, offering everything to Krishna and converting everything spiritually, we can transform ourselves from material mode to mode of goodness and thereby get ourselves out of this all devouring situation. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are sitting places of this lust. So where is this lust sitting? In the senses, in the mind, and in the intelligence. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders them. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses and slaying this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, and thus by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. What does Prabhupada have to say for this? Text 43, which is the last text of this chapter. He says, the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire, for dominating the resources of material nature, desire for overlording and for sense gratification. This is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but gradually develop Krishna consciousness, and thereby one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the third chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of Karma Yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. That's the title. We call it Karma Yoga, but the English title would be the discharge of one's prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. And that's how this chapter ends. We will stop here because it's almost out of time. We have about 8 minutes to wrap up. Next time, we will go to chapter 4 and we'll learn about the Supreme Lord, how he appears in this world. We learn about disciplic succession, how it has been transferred. Lord talks to Arjuna about how, they both are same and yet they're not the same. Similarities and then the differences. He talks about the Varnas and Ashramas that he has created, and then we see more and more. So I have 2 questions for you from this chapter as you read. So because we did do a recap and roundup. So I was thinking just 2 questions for you to take back. Did this chapter give you a clearer understanding of the cycle of sacrifice and the reason we should always do our prescribed duties? I hope so, because we repeated it again and again at that part. So when you think of chapter 3, remember that. Chapter 3 is all about doing your prescribed duties. Why are you doing it and how should you do it? And what's the purpose? And then how can we apply this knowledge about lust? The last part. What is this lust? What is this attraction, this connection that I create by being in the mode of passion and connecting to the material world around me? What is this that's being created? And how do I keep it from becoming wrath, which is really destructive? So how do I apply Krishna consciousness? Because lust everybody has. It's an attraction to material nature. It's not something that can be avoided, but we can change it. So instead of going from mode of passion to mode of ignorance, we go from mode of passion to mode of goodness. And we can do that by applying Krishna consciousness. Thank you so much for your patience and accommodation. Please forgive me if any part of the lecture was a drag, or you couldn't connect the dots very well, or if I didn't express myself, or my understanding was lacking. I am perpetually a student in training, so I have no qualifications except the fact that I was asked to present, and so I tried. Please consider, if anything was useful, it is by the blessings of my gurus and the mercy of my Guru Maharaj. Anything that is not right is certainly my falling, my inability, and I beg for you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Prabhu, very, very nice. I mean, you cannot be wrong, right? I mean, you are reading.
Sending me down the pipe.
Yeah, it's disciplic succession, right? We cannot be wrong, basically.
Actually, I like that statement because that your statement isn't applying to me. It's applying to what I'm reading from. So, a lot of times when we pick up the Gita and I'm looking for I find this sentence that Prabhupada says. And then Maharaj always, I remember what Maharaj says, that you need to find the verse and the text. Make a note. Because tomorrow, when you put that sentence out of context, you won't know where you pulled it from. And if you can't show proof, then it's not valid. So many times, that's why I try to pull out from the purport those sentences. Prabhupada is a genius in so many ways.
Yeah.
One paragraph of his 2-hour lecture will explain.
Yes.
We'll go for it. And it's so good.
Yeah, because the verses in Bhagavad Gita is a lot of that context is lost, basically. That happened 5,000 years back. Prabhupada's purports are so much in today's context that we can pull in, examples from our lives, examples from the lives of our near and dear ones. And that's the reason, apart from that purport itself, which is sometimes long, we can also, from our own experiences, we can add that how correct those purports are. They're very much, pertinent to what is going on in today's world, right? I mean, that last question of Arjuna about lust is like almost, you don't know whether at some point, when exactly you stop doing karma yoga and you became a karmi, you don't know, right?
Very subtle.
Very subtle.
For us, we don't notice. But Krishna is very merciful. That's why we lean on him. Prabhupada again explains, you can't do it on your own. You can't do it on your own. You need to lean on Krishna. Let him, guide you. And that's why he keeps explaining the reliability of Vedic scriptures, the capacity of Krishna to guide you. I was thinking when I first read the Bhagavad Gita, I'm just a mundane, average person. So I read it and I thought, Prabhupada, you're repeating yourself again. And I get it. Just say something new, okay? You're saying the same thing again and again and again. It's been very many years in Krishna consciousness. I haven't absorbed even 5% of what he said.
Yeah.
Ego.
And that is a very interesting point you made there in Bhagavatam, when Devahuti is telling Kapil Dev, I get what you're saying. Theoretically, that all makes sense, but I can't control, basically, right? I get attached. I have this attraction. And then Kapil Dev says exactly the same thing. What you said is, you have to read this, you have to listen to these instructions and read Bhagavatam for a long, long time. So it has to, because we had been in this world for a very long, long time, right?
And indulging ourselves for a very long time.
Right?
Comes naturally.
So I mean, it's just, I mean, we have to keep doing our part, and then you have to, patiently wait for Guru and Krishna's, mercy of other Vaishnavas. That
my father is going in for surgery recently, and it gave me an opportunity to have a realization. I was writing him a letter, and I was sending some kavacha and oil for him, and I was telling him, because he's into he's more into Brahman realization and stuff like that. So he used to tell me that all these puja part, all this is like a crutch, only for people in the neophyte level. Once you get to a point, you don't need these crutches. Just able to do it on your own. Now too, he's still my dad. We work these things too. So I had to convince him, and I was sending the stuff, and I said, Dad, you may think I'm leaning on crutches, but I would like to think that I'm using the arms of someone stronger than me to lift me up. Just like you used to lift me when I was younger. Please allow him to lift you. And in that process, you may get the strength you need. And that is Krishna. Prabhupada is telling us again and again that do not think you can do it. It's too difficult. The modes are very strong. And lust is a natural propensity for us, having lived like this. But you lean on Krishna.
I mean, that is where, I don't know which chapter, I keep forgetting this chapter. Say, Devi Esha Gunamai, Mama Maya
Duratyaya.
He's a very strong, Gunamai, the three Gunamai, right? The Mahamaya is very strong, basically, because it sees Krishna's energy, basically, in this world, right? And
they're all doing their job.
They're all doing their job.
If he decides to take you home, nobody's going to stop him. So
they're all doing their job.
Throw our dice in that direction and say, maybe he'll just take us home.
Yeah, yeah.
I know I'm not yet qualified, but
See, that is the thing, is in this bhakti, we sometimes feel that we are ready, but we really don't know all our past lives. So Mahamaya being very close to Krishna, she knows, just like Krishna knows, she also knows, basically, where we stand. And she would be more than happy, basically. She will have one less rebellious soul to deal with, basically, right? So, uh, so that's,
she's like the teacher with all these crazy kids running around everywhere,
yeah,
breaking stuff,
yeah,
jumping, all high on sugar, basically.
yeah, all high on sugar, exactly.
She's like calming them down.
That's a nice way to put it, all high on sugar.
So self-indulgence in the material world, you get more and more caught into the material struggle. And
Yes.
she's trying to calm you down and get the sugar out so that, you can think calmly and understand.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a
Mataji, let me
pleasure.
quickly check, online if someone has
Yes,
put
sir.
any comments or questions. Let me check. Okay, we don't have anything. We don't have anything online. So, yeah, so it's up to you. Whenever you want to conclude,
Then
let
we
me.
will wrap up for today. Thank you so much to everybody who's listening. Thank you to everyone who will listen. Very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Such a pleasure to see you. Hare
Manjula
Krishna.
Kantha Mataji ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Mother Ki Jai.
Pancha Kalpatarupyascha Kripasinni Devacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah.
Jai.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, devotees, we'll close the session now.